Hey loves, welcome to The Quick Tip,
I'm your host, Dejada.
and I'm Kamisha, and we are a part of the team at Sister Adia Community Mental Wellness in Chicago. The Quick Tip is a podcast where we discuss relatable topics in Black women's mental wellness.
We provide thoughtful reflections, quick tips, and leave you with some things to take action on to improve your mental wellness.
Sit back, relax, and enjoy the podcast. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Quick Tip podcast. I'm your host, Kamisha.
I'm Dejada.
And I'm Dr. Adia.
I am so excited for this conversation about value from within with Dr. Adia Gooden. And the reason why this topic is so important is because identifying our self-worth can be challenging, especially in a world where we're pushed to define our value from external things and what we produce, especially as women. And so there are very few people who are redefining what self-worth looks like and how to focus on unconditional value from just who we are as people. So we're fortunate to have Dr. Adia Gooden, a clinical community psychologist who's made waves by laying out what it looks like to embrace your unconditional self-worth as a Black woman. Adia is a sought-after, dynamic speaker who gives talks and workshops on unconditional self-worth, imposter syndrome, and Black women in mental health. Dr. Adia co-authored a book that is out right now, Promoting Black Women's Mental Health, published by Cambridge University Press. She gave a TED Talk on cultivating unconditional self-worth, which has over 1 million views on YouTube. Dr. Adia hosts the Unconditionally Worthy podcast and coaches high-achieving professional women to embrace their unconditional self-worth. Dr. Adia is a licensed clinical psychologist who received her bachelor's in psychology from Stanford University and her PhD in clinical community psychology from DePaul University. Welcome, Dr. Adia, to the Quick Tip podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Tell us a little about yourself and your own journey to cultivating unconditional self-worth in your life.
Yeah, so I feel like my challenges with self-worth and not feeling worthy started when I was fairly young. I had a good life growing up. I was raised like upper middle class. Both of my parents are actually clinical psychologists. And so generally life was comfortable, but I felt pretty early on like there was something wrong with me. And that was never sort of explicitly said. Like I thankfully didn't experience any significant trauma. Nobody said you're unworthy, but I just felt like I wasn't fully loved as I was. I felt like I wasn't fully included. I felt like there was something wrong with me. And so I pretty early on felt like, okay, I got to be different. I've got to do something different in order to prove that I'm worthy. So that meant get the best grades, get into the best schools, be the best friend who is always giving, never asking for anything in return. And that just kind of set me on a path through high school and college and even, graduate school, where I was sort of oriented towards me, who I am inherently is not worthy. There's something I have to do to prove, to give in order to make people feel like I'm worthy and good enough. And I wouldn't say that I sort of explicitly knew that, but looking back, I can see that that was the pattern I was engaged in, right? This conditional sense of worthiness. And it really, in graduate school, I sort of like was on an overworking myself trajectory, because I made up all these deadlines and I need to finish in 5 years and all of this stuff that was totally unnecessary. And I got to a point where I was just really, really anxious. And that finally pushed me to like go to therapy. It was like, okay, got to go to therapy. And then the first few months of therapy, I, played perfect. I'm sure y'all know that experience, yeah. Right? Like, it's fine. Maybe I have a little stress. I need a coping strategy, right? So it took a while, even in that, to allow myself to be vulnerable and to share that I was struggling and feeling imperfect and explore where that was coming from. And so for me, I sort of it all came to a head when I passed my dissertation defense and felt immediately crushed and empty in the realization that didn't work either. that also did not make me feel worthy, right? So I walked out of that room after they said, okay, you passed your dissertation defense. And I started sobbing because it was like, oh, like none of these things have worked. I have tried and tried and tried and worked and worked and worked, and none of it has made me feel worthy. And that really pushed me to start looking somewhere else. And that somewhere else was inward, right? It sort of helped me to see like it wasn't just going to be another relationship or another degree or another certification or another good grade. It really was going to be something internal. So I had to turn inward, right? Because I realized that the external wasn't going to make me feel worthy. And it wasn't like it was an immediate switch. I really had to do some soul searching and continue in therapy and listen to spiritual teachings and all of those things. And so that helped me with my own journey. And then as I was doing clinical work, especially with young adults, I was realizing that I wasn't the only one who struggled, and that this challenge that I had gone through that I thought, I was alone in was somewhat universal. And so that really guided me to help start to think about like, how do I help not only myself, but other people understand and really believe and live from the truth that they're worthy.
Dr. Adia, I do have a question. You said that at 12, you started to feel that your self-worth was dependent on your achievements and accomplishments. You said after you passed your dissertation, you still didn't feel worthy enough. And so it seems like there's a big time in your life where you felt like where you didn't have unconditional self-worth. And having parents who are clinical psychologists and also being a student to get a degree in that as well, why do you feel like it took so long for you to realize that? And you also mentioned that you were alone in this. So did you not share these feelings?
Yeah, those are good questions. So I think that there were some core aspects of my experience growing up with my parents that were hard for me. So even though overall my parents are wonderful people, there was a lot of distance. And for me, there was a lot of loneliness. So I grew up as an only child, and I often felt like there were my parents and then there was me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I also made up as a kid that they were perfect, right? And so that was part of me. And they never said I'm perfect, right? But that was part of me saying, okay, well, they're perfect. I also feel sort of outside of their world. I feel a little excluded. So then let me try to like achieve my way into their approval. And there was never explicit disapproval, but my parents also were not the type to be like, we are so proud of you. Like, we just think you're amazing, right? Like that was just never, that was not the vibe. That wasn't how it was going. So I think that sort of aspect. And I think the truth is that even with our clinical training, we don't necessarily talk about self-worth, right? Like, we talk about mental illness, we talk about family dynamics, we talk about a lot of things, but the conversation about self-worth and a sense of self, there's some sense of self stuff, but it's often in this like psychodynamic, grounded in like what, old white men were saying back in the day, right? Like it just felt disconnected from my reality. So I think that because of that, it's like I knew I wanted to help other people. I knew I didn't want other people to feel the way I felt, but I don't think that I could clearly say it wasn't like I at 12 was like, oh, this is a problem of unworthiness, right? Like I don't even know that I could have said that right at like 25, right? But that was the feeling. So I think that's part of why I didn't say anything. And I do think there was also this sense of like, I don't want to burden people. So I had a lot of trouble asking for help. I had a lot of trouble saying that something was up with me, right? And usually if I did it, it was like very packaged and well put together and I've already sort of figured it out and I'm good, right? But even in the expressing of like, I don't feel worthy, that's vulnerable and that's sort of asking for support from someone. And I wasn't in a space where I was willing to allow myself to do that.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. I feel like I kind of had a similar upbringing where my parents were in my life, but they weren't like emotionally present or there to say, good job. And so I feel like I have a small people pleaser tendency because I feel like I didn't receive a lot of feedback as a kid. So I'm not sure. It's just like, okay, maybe if I do this big thing, it would be enough. And I kind of realized that when I was younger, like I'm going to school and getting good grades to impress my parents and I'm not getting a reaction from them. But as soon as my grades slip, I get a reaction. And and now like going through this is like making sense. And I'm like, wow. Because even now I feel like the work that I do, I'm really, I know I'm really good at my job, but I'm in the process of telling my boss, like, I need you to tell me, I think you did a really good job on this project, instead of saying this project was solid. Like
Mm.
it helps me feel it connects me to the stuff that I do, even though I am in learning unconditional self-worth, I am more than that project. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I'm happy that you are not alone in this. I'm not alone in this.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
speaking about unconditional self-worth, you define it as the sense that you deserve to be alive, to be loved and cared for, and like you deserve to take up space. Can you talk about how your approach can transform how Black women find value in themselves?
Yeah. I mean, I think on so many levels, the messages, explicit and implicit, that Black women receive are counter to unconditional self-worth, right? Like, deserve to be alive, right? Like, we are murdered, assaulted, abused at incredibly high rates, right? Whether that's by police, by family members, by community members, like incredibly high rates. So even just asserting, I deserve to be alive is powerful and is radical as a Black woman. I deserve to be loved and cared for, right? We could think about that for Black women on so many levels, right? We talk about, maternal mortality. We talk about health inequities, right? Like literally not receiving life-saving care or not receiving, pain management or not receiving, like basic access to care, right? That claiming that we deserve love and care, again, is radical for us. And then to take up space, right? So many of us as women in general and Black women are told to shrink, to be quiet, to hide, to silence ourselves, right? And so to say, I can be big and large and loud, and I am worthy of that space that I'm going to take up not only in the world, but also in my life, right? You can even think about, how do you take up space in your own life, right? Like, do you care for yourself? Do you put boundaries around your calendar and schedule such that you have space on your schedule, right? So on all of these layers, claiming that we are worthy of being alive, of being loved and cared for, and of taking up space is really radical for Black women because it counters so many of the messages and the experiences that we have in broader society.
There's no better way I could have said that. And I feel like after you answer that, I'm like, why? I'm just like, why was that even a question? You know? Because that's true. Like yes, like yes to everything you just said. And it's like, I'm thinking like, I don't have any time on my calendar specifically for myself. And this is, this is absolutely why we need you. Like, wow.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And
Mm.
so, your TED Talk, Cultivating Unconditional Self Worth, is highly watched on YouTube. It's one of the most popular, I would say, like self worth, mental health focused TED Talks. And I also just do like a sidebar. One of our most highly watched episodes from last season or the season before last was on a self-love support group that we were having. It was the most highly watched, listened to episode, and it was just telling people about a self-love support group. So I can see why it resonates, why your TED Talk would resonate. If that's something is happening where people are like, I'm gravitating towards this. So what are your thoughts about like why people are so gravitated towards self-worth at this point in time?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think similar to the conversation that Jada and I were having a little earlier, I think it resonates. I think so many people carry these experiences of not feeling worthy, not feeling fully worthy, only feeling conditionally worthy, and they don't talk about it because there's not really the space to talk about it. And I also think we're in a world right now where there are we're inundated with messages about what is supposed to make you worthy, right? Like in social media, like what you're supposed to look like, what you're supposed to act like, what your life is supposed to look like, what you're supposed to be doing, right? Like that is nonstop. And then people are doing some of these things, but still not feeling good, right? And so I just think that a lot of people carry with them a sense that there is something wrong, that they're not doing it right, that they're not truly happy or experiencing joy. And there's not a lot of understanding about what the solution actually is, because the solutions that are offered by the world are get the degree, get the job, get the money, get the partner, have the kids, right? Like all these external things. And then people are like doing those things, but they're like, oh, nope, not working. Right. And so I think because of that, it really resonates because it speaks to something that is not part of the broader conversation, but really strikes a chord. I think it also resonates because I shared my story, right? And I led with like, here's where I was, here's how it looked for me, and here's how it connects to some of the broader problems that we're seeing in the world. And so I think because it wasn't sort of a purely intellectual academic kind of story, right? Like a talk, because it was also personal, people found themselves and their own stories and experiences in it and felt probably some relief of like, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one. And there is something I could do about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what you touched on with the conversation that you've elevated around unconditional self-worth is both something's missing or I'm not enough. Like both of those things go hand in hand into how we see ourselves or value ourselves or think we're worthy. If we think something's missing, we'll work until we get it, right? And then if we think we're not enough, we'll also maybe do all these things to compensate for not having certain things or not being a certain person. And so what does it look like to live out unconditional self-worth? So, even for you thinking about either personal examples or your work as a clinical psychologist, like what does it actually look like to live out an unconditionally self-worthy life?
Oh, I love this question. So at the core of unconditional self-worth, I would say the foundation is really about our relationship with ourselves. So it's how we see ourselves, how we treat ourselves, and how we feel about ourselves, right? I think about how do you talk to yourself and how do you show up for and with yourself as you're navigating the good things in life and the hard things in life, right? Because so many of us, first of all, are sort of have all this self-criticism, are judging ourselves, criticizing ourselves, especially when we're experiencing a challenge or make a mistake or have a failure. And then sometimes, especially if we feel unworthy, even when something goes right, our mind is like, well, you don't really deserve that, or they're going to take it away from you, or you didn't really earn that, or you shouldn't, blah, 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 or that was okay, but you got to be on to the next thing, right? So it's like, how do you show up for and with yourself as you navigate life? And I created a framework around sort of 3 core pieces. And one is freeing yourself. So it's freeing yourself from the conditions that you've placed on your worth and the things that are sort of holding you back, these narratives and these stories that you've told yourself about what makes you unworthy. Then we go into loving yourself. So how do you care for yourself? How do you accept yourself? Not feel like you need to be different or prove yourself, but accept who you are, flaws, strengths, all of the above. And then how do you be yourself, right? How do you tune into your inner wisdom, your intuition and values? How do you show up to and create healthy relationships and actually let yourself receive love? And so these core pieces to me are how you start living from the truth that you're worthy. And I think of them as sort of ongoing practices that we can choose to engage in on any given day. And if we lose it or we lose sight of it, we can always return to these ways of being with ourselves.
That's good. I feel like that kind of answered a question that I had for you was, how can those listening to this episode right now begin to embody unconditional self-worth, like in this current moment? But I feel like you gave an answer. Can you repeat the 3 core things that you said?
Yeah, I'll repeat the core things and then maybe like drill into like a little bit more practical to
Okay.
answer that question if that's helpful. So the 3 things are freeing yourself. So freeing yourself from things you're holding against yourself, stories, narratives, loving yourself, so accepting yourself, offering yourself care, compassion, and being yourself. So showing up in the world as your authentic self, guided by your intuition and your wisdom and values. And I would say the thing that I like to encourage people to do the most as a start is really practice self-compassion, right? And that involves seeing yourself, tuning into how you are feeling even in this very moment. It involves accepting yourself, so not judging yourself, but allowing yourself to feel or be wherever you are in this moment. And then offering yourself kindness and encouragement. So instead of criticism or judgment, or I should be different, or I should show up different or feel different, just offering yourself affirmation. It's okay that I'm here right now. It's okay that I feel this way. It's okay that I'm struggling with this, or it's going to be okay, right? That's a really great way to make the practice of self-worth, of claiming your worth, and self-compassion actionable.
And tell us about your service offerings. So, on your website, you have a couple of different services that you offer that can support people who are struggling with self-worth, conditional self-worth, because you're helping them with unconditional self-worth. And then also share about like your podcast and your podcast Unconditionally Worthy, and kind of like what your focus is through that medium.
Yeah. So I have a group coaching program, which is specifically for BIPOC, high achieving professional women. So it's focused on helping you claim the fact that you're unconditionally worthy. So it takes place in a group space. It's a curriculum based program that really guides you sort of step by step through the framework that I just shared. And it's my favorite thing to do, and a really powerful sort of small group coaching program. So I have that. And then I have a course called Date Yourself, which is really about building a healthy, loving relationship with yourself through the practices of self-compassion and self-care, tuning into yourself and learning how to care for yourself truly. And then I have my podcast called the Unconditionally Worthy podcast, where I talk about self-worth. I have some solo episodes where I'm talking about my own journey, practices that help me. And then I have lots and lots of guest episodes where I'm talking to people who have expertise in a range of different things, who are sharing their own self-worth journeys and also sharing their insights on self-worth and how we can all claim it for ourselves.
Great. Awesome. Thank you for what you're doing with working with women in this particular area with self-worth. I think someone would be lying if you never felt like you weren't worthy. So the fact that you're really helping women to do that inner work in terms of seeing their value, seeing that they are more than what they produce or what they achieve is just incredible. So thank you so much for your work. And of course, we mentioned your podcast and your website, but are there other ways that people can stay connected to you on all the channels.
Sure. So I'm on Instagram at Dr. Adia Gooden. I'm on LinkedIn under Dr. Adia Gooden. I also have a free ebook that I like to share. It's on 4 practices to help you connect to your unconditional self-worth. So you sign up for that on my website, dradiagooden.com/free-ebook. That'll get you on my email list where you'll just get emails from me to encourage you on your self-worth journey.
So our on the couch question, Jada, could you ask Dr. D our on the couch question?
We have a question from Jazzy. She wants to know, can you practice self-love and self-care without being selfish?
Yeah, my answer is absolutely yes. Prioritizing yourself or including yourself in your priority list or your list of priorities is not selfish, right? It involves just including yourself and acknowledging yourself, acknowledging that you deserve to take up your own space. It does not mean that you are ignoring everyone else's needs and wants. It does not mean that you're neglecting everyone else in your life. It may mean that you have to say no sometimes and set some boundaries, which may make you uncomfortable and other people uncomfortable. But that does not mean that you're being selfish. And what I truly believe and have experienced is that when you prioritize yourself and take care of yourself, you're actually better able to offer care and love and support to other people from an aligned place that is sustainable versus ending up burning out or feeling resentful of other people because you're overgiving and overextending yourself.
Thank you for that answer for Jazzy. Jazzy, I hope that was really helpful, especially coming from Dr. Adia. So now we are at the end of the episode and we're going to get some final quick tips. We are the Quick Tip Podcast after all. And so, Kamisha, we're going to start with you and then we can go to Dr. Adia.
My quick tip is to take a moment and write down all the things that are a part of who you are, and to show like gratitude to all of who you are right now.
I love that. My quick tip is to pause and consider how you could be just a little bit kinder to yourself.
That's a good one. My quick tip would be to don't allow your accomplishments or what expectations people put on you to define your worth or who you are and what you're capable of.
Those were some great quick tips. Thank you all for listening to another episode of the Quick Tip Podcast. We'll tag ways that you can stay connected to Dr. Adia in the show notes. We are going to have additional episodes for our self-care and self-worth series, so stay tuned to our upcoming episodes. They drop every Sunday. Take care of all of you and be well.
Thank you for tuning in to the Quick Tip Podcast with Sister Afia. Stay connected with us by following us on Instagram and Facebook at Sister Afia. Join us for one of our upcoming groups, classes, or workshops, and sign up for therapy if you're an Illinois resident at www.sisterafia.com/services. And if you enjoyed this episode, do us a favor and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We greatly appreciate you for being a part of our community, and we look forward to connecting with you soon. Take care.